The first time Jake Nolan took her hand, the whole church basement went dead quiet. Paper plates stopped mid-air. Plastic forks hovered over potato salad. Someone's folding chair scraped against the linoleum and then froze. She stood alone at the end of the potluck line tray, trembling in her good hand, the other arm ending just above the elbow. The right side of her face didn't move when she tried to smile, the nerve damage pulling her mouth into a permanent half-frown. Kids stared. Grown folks pretended not to. "Lord have mercy," someone whispered. "They let her out looking like that." The woman heard it. You could tell by the way her shoulders flinched just a little. She turned like she might bolt for the exit metal brace on her leg, clicking against the tile. And that's when Jake pushed back his chair. He wasn't dressed like a hero, just a tired school custodian in a flannel shirt, jeans still smelling faintly of bleach. But he walked straight toward her while the town of Maple Ridge watched like it was a car wreck. Her eyes went wide as he stepped into her space. He didn't gawk. He didn't apologize for her. He just held out his calloused hand, palm up, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I'm Jake," he said quietly. "We saved you a spot." He wrapped his fingers around her trembling ones, steady and sure, and walked her back toward the crowded tables as if there wasn't a single thing about her that needed hiding. "Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world. Now let me take you back to where this really started." Jake Nolan was 37, and his life smelled like floor wax and cafeteria pizza. By day, he pushed a mop through the hallways of Maple Ridge Middle School in Ohio, wiping up spilled milk and locker room mud. By night, he stocked shelves at the discount grocery on Route 12, lining up cans, while his back reminded him he wasn't 20 anymore. He lived in a fading duplex on the edge of town with his 8-year-old daughter, Emma. Their place was small, 2 bedrooms, if you were generous, with a leaky kitchen faucet and baseboard heaters that clicked, all winter long. But the rent was paid on time. There were sticky notes with Emma's drawings on the fridge, and every morning there was a packed lunch waiting on the counter with her name in his sloppy handwriting. His wife, Carrie, had been gone 3 years. Heart attack in her sleep at 34. No warning, no big medical history, just a Sunday night that turned into a lifetime of daddy. Why isn't Mom waking up? The town had shown up with casseroles and condolences for a month, then drifted back to their own lives. Jake was left with a little girl who had nightmares and a stack of hospital bills that never seemed to shrink. People in Maple Ridge were polite enough, but when they talked about Jake, it was always with that little shrug. Good guy just never got his act together. Smart, but just a janitor. The PTA moms barely saw him unless the trash cans overflowed. The kids called him Mr. Mop when they thought he couldn't hear. His in-laws loved Emma, but still looked at him like he'd failed their daughter by not becoming something more impressive. What they never noticed was the way he showed up every single day. The way he knew which 7th grader needed an extra granola bar slipped into their backpack. The way he fixed a broken locker door before a shy boy had to be laughed at. The way he'd work 16 hours, then still drag himself to the Dollar Theater on Friday nights. Because Emma loved movie popcorn. He'd long ago decided that love and loyalty were more important than titles on a business card. But that didn't stop the late-night thoughts that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't enough. The whole thing really began on a Thursday afternoon in October when the trees along Main Street were turning that stubborn Ohio red. Jake was cleaning up after the last lunch period when Emma burst into the empty cafeteria backpack, bouncing cheeks flushed from the cold. "Daddy, you have to come to the library on Saturday," she said, breathless. "There's a lady there who talks funny on one side, but she laughs with her eyes and she's teaching me sign language and she doesn't care that I talk about Mom." Jake had frowned, wiping his hands on a towel. The town library. Some stranger talking to his daughter about his dead wife. "Slow down, Bug," he said. "Who is this lady?" Emma's eyes shone. "She's my new friend," she said. "And I think she's sad like us. You'll like her. I already told her you would." The next Saturday, the library smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner. Jake stood just inside the automatic doors, Emma's small hand in his, trying not to feel out of place. He'd only been in here a handful of times since high school. Bookshelves stretched out in quiet rows, and dust motes drifted in the beams of autumn light. "There she is," Emma whispered, tugging him toward the children's section. At a low table near the window sat a woman in a faded green cardigan, a stack of picture books in front of her. Her dark hair was pinned back on one side, the other side falling forward to soften the hollowness of her cheek. The right side of her face didn't quite keep up when she smiled, pulling just a little slower, a little tighter. Her left sleeve was rolled and pinned just above where her forearm should have been. She looked up when she heard Emma's voice. For a second, Jake saw it, that flash of wary calculation in her eyes. The kind you only get from being looked at like a curiosity one too many times. Her gaze skated past him, lingered on Emma, then came back to meet his. "Miss Nora." "This is my dad," Emma announced in that bright way kids have when they don't know they're supposed to tiptoe. "I told you he would come?" The woman straightened, resting her good hand on the table. "Nora Hayes," she said, her words slightly thick on one side, but clear. "You must be Emma's famous dad." "Just Jake," he replied suddenly, aware of the grease stains he could never fully scrub from his cuticles. He offered his hand, then hesitated, not wanting to force her into anything. She noticed, and without a blink reached out to shake. Her grip was firm, warmer than he expected. It should have been a simple moment. A single dad meeting the woman who'd been helping his daughter learn the basics of American Sign Language and sounding out tricky words. But even as they talked about book recommendations, about how Emma liked to sit right in the middle of story time, Jake could feel the eyes from the front desk from the woman shelving DVDs. When he glanced up, they looked away too quickly. On the drive home, Emma jabbered non-stop about Nora. "She understands when I get sad," she said, swinging her legs in the passenger seat. "She didn't tell me to be strong for Mom, or that everything happens for a reason. She just said it must hurt, and that it's okay to miss her." Jake swallowed around the sudden tightness in his throat. "She seems kind," he said. It came out softer than he meant it to. The small-town hum started a week later. It showed up first in sideways looks at the grocery store. A pair of older ladies by the canned vegetables lowered their voices when he walked past, their eyes flicking from him to Emma as she chattered about the chapter book Nora had lent her. At school, one of the teachers, Mrs. Watkins, cornered him by the supply closet. She was the kind of woman who always smelled like lavender and made a point of saying she told it like it is. "Jake," she began, folding her arms. "I hear Emma's been spending a lot of time with that woman at the library." He wiped his hands on his work pants, already tired. "With Nora," he asked. "She's been helping Emma with reading. It's been good for her." Mrs. Watkins pursed her lips. "I'm sure her heart's in the right place," she said in a tone that meant she wasn't sure at all. "But some of the parents are concerned. She's not exactly stable looking. Kids can be frightened, you know, and Emma's had enough to deal with." Jake felt something cold settle in his gut. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, keeping his voice level. Mrs. Watkins glanced around as if the woman might appear out of thin air. "It means," she said, "that a woman who's clearly been through some sort of trauma, who's missing an arm, and can barely smile properly may not be the best influence on a grieving child. People talk, Jake. Maybe consider that. He swallowed hard. There were a dozen things he wanted to say about how Emma had finally stopped waking up crying every night since meeting Nora, about how this traumatized woman had treated his daughter's pain with more gentleness than half the town combined. Instead, he nodded once. "I'll consider it," he said. Walking away, he could feel Mrs. Watkins's disapproval following him like a draft under a closed door. He didn't tell Emma about the conversation, but he watched more closely. He watched how after afternoons at the library, Emma came home with a notebook full of awkward little drawings of hands forming signs, "Thank you, brave mom." How she started humming again while setting the table. How her shoulders relaxed when she talked about Nora's stories about the dog Nora had growing up. About the funny way she had to relearn tying her shoes. He watched the way she lit up when Nora's name came up like someone had turned a dimmer switch a little higher in her chest. So he ignored the whispers. For a while. The next hit came from a direction he should have expected. Sunday afternoon, his former mother-in-law caught him in the church parking lot. Bonnie Reynolds stepped between him and the car door, still in her floral dress Bible, tucked into a leather cover with her name embossed in gold. "Jake Nolan. We need to talk," she said, voice sharp as a snapped twig. Emma was already in the back seat, buckling herself in. "Hey, Bonnie," he said warily. "What's up?" She thrust her phone at him. On the screen was a blurry photo clearly taken without permission. It showed Nora sitting on the library steps with Emma laughing at something on a book in the girl's lap. Nora's pinned sleeve was visible, her face turned just enough to show the asymmetry of her smile. "Is this who my granddaughter is spending her free time with?" Bonnie asked. "This person?" Jake's jaw tightened. "That's Nora," he said. "She volunteers at the library. She's been helping Emma with her reading." "And have you looked into her?" Bonnie demanded. "Do you know anything about her background? People are saying she's some kind of shut-in, that she hides in that rental over on Maple because she can't handle being seen. God knows what she's been through. Jake, Emma's vulnerable. She doesn't need to be dragged into some stranger's issues." He handed the phone back, careful not to squeeze too hard. "Nora's been good to Emma," he said. "That's what I know." Bonnie sniffed. "I heard she lost her arm in some kind of explosion she pressed on. What kind of life do you think she lives? What kind of choices did she make? You have a responsibility to protect Emma, not throw her at the first damaged soul you find." The words hit deeper than he let show. Not because he believed them, but because they came tangled with all the old criticisms, all the ways Bonnie and her husband had always thought he wasn't quite enough for their daughter. He could feel Emma watching from the back seat, eyes peeking between the headrests. "Bonnie," he said quietly, "I'm not going to stand here and let you talk about someone like that, least of all in front of Emma." "She doesn't have to hear the truth," Bonnie shot back. "You're still making terrible decisions. Some things never change." He wanted to yell. He wanted to tell her that Carrie had chosen him, that he'd been the one there when her heart stopped, that he'd been the one holding her hand while the paramedics worked, that he'd been the one explaining death to their daughter while Bonnie was still calling from 3 states away. Instead, he opened the car door. "We're done here," he said. That night, after Emma was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with a stack of unpaid bills and a bowl of cereal that had gone soggy. The duplex was too quiet. The baseboard heater ticked and hummed. The streetlight outside turned the blinds into stripes across the floor. He thought about Mrs. Watkins' thinly veiled warning, about Bonnie's sharp words, about the way the librarian's smiles had become tighter, about how fragile his world really was, 2 jobs that could vanish with a single complaint, a custody arrangement that depended on him staying responsible in the eyes of people who had never spent a night in his shoes. He thought too about Emma's laughter in the car after library days, about the way Nora slid a little drawing Emma made into her bag like it was something precious. Jake was not a man who cried easily. Grief had dried him out in certain places. But sitting in the dim kitchen, he pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes and let out a slow, shaky breath. "Lord, just don't let me screw this up," he murmured to nobody in particular. The dam really started to crack a few weeks later. He was buffing scuff marks off the gym floor when the principal called him to the office. Mr. Daniels was a tall man with a golf tan and a diploma-heavy wall. He didn't usually bother with the custodial staff unless there was a leak. Jake sat in the single chair across from the desk, suddenly aware of the squeak of his sneakers on the polished tile. "We've had a call," Mr. Daniels began, steepling his fingers. "From a concerned community member." Jake's stomach dropped. About what he asked, though he already knew, Mr. Daniels sighed as if this were all terribly burdensome for him personally. "About your association with a woman named Nora Hayes," he said. "Apparently she spends quite a bit of time with your daughter here on school grounds and at the public library. There are questions about her suitability around children given her circumstances." Jake's hands curled into fists on his knees. "Her circumstances," he repeated slowly. "You mean her disability?" "I mean," Mr. Daniels said carefully, "that parents can be sensitive. The last thing we need is a rumor that we aren't vetting adults who spend time with students. Mrs. Watkins tells me Emma's been talking about death more in class. About missing limbs. It's upsetting the other kids." Jake stared at him. "Emma talks about death because her mother died," he said. "She talks about missing limbs because she's trying to understand what happened to Nora. That's not a bad thing. I'm sure you have the best intentions," Mr. Daniels replied. "But if this continues to cause disruption, we may have to ask that Ms. Hayes limit her involvement with Emma during school events. And unofficially, Jake, if it starts to look like you're making questionable choices as a parent, people might start to ask whether this environment is appropriate for Emma." There it was. Not a threat, not exactly. Just a hint. A reminder that his job, his reputation, his ability to keep his child everything could be shaken by the opinions of people who'd never sat on his worn couch and watched their kid fall asleep with dried tears on their cheeks. He stood slowly. "Understood," he said, his voice flat. The rest of the day passed in a blur. He mopped up spilled juice, tightened a loose door handle, fixed a leaky faucet in the teacher's lounge. On the surface, nothing had changed. Inside, something ugly was taking root, a twist of fear and anger that sat under his ribs and wouldn't move. That evening at the library, he watched from a corner table as Nora and Emma worked through a workbook. Nora guided Emma's hand through a sign, "Hope," then laughed at something Emma said. Her laugh was a little lopsided, but it was real, full-bodied. He saw, too, the way a couple of other parents steered their kids to a different table. The way one mother whispered something behind her hand, eyes sharpening, when they flicked to Nora's missing arm. When Nora looked up and caught his gaze, she paused. There was a question in her eyes. Later, as they walked out into the parking lot, autumn biting at their cheeks, Nora fell into step beside him. "You look like someone just told you the world's ending," she said lightly. He almost brushed it off. Almost said he was just tired, but Emma skipped ahead a few steps, humming her backpack bouncing, and he thought about all the little comments and warnings piling up around them like snowdrifts. "People have been talking," he admitted. "About you. About us. About Emma spending so much time with you. Nora went very still. "Ah," she said, the sound small but steady. "That old song. It's getting to the point where my job might be on the line," he went on. "And maybe more." His voice roughened on the last word. Nora's jaw worked for a moment. She looked out over the parking lot, the way the streetlights painted everything in harsh pools of white. "I don't want to make trouble for you," she said quietly. "I've been trouble before, just by existing where people could see me. I can step back. Emma will be okay. Kids are resilient." He hated how practiced the words sounded, like she'd said them 100 times to 100 people eager to take her up on it. Daddy Emma's voice floated back to them. She'd stopped by the curb, frowning. "Are they saying mean things about Miss Nora again?" she asked. "Mrs. Watkins told me I shouldn't sit by her at the next reading day because she might make the other kids uncomfortable." Nora flinched like she'd been slapped. Jake felt something in his chest snap. He walked the last few steps crouched to look straight into his daughter's eyes. "Emma," he said, "none of this is because of anything you did, or anything Nora did. Some grown-ups are wrong about her. That's on them, not you." Her eyes filled with frustrated tears. "But they're wrong about you too," she said. "They think you're not important just because you clean the floors. And they were wrong about Mom being in a better place, like we're supposed to be happy. And now they're wrong about Miss Nora being scary when she's not." She scrubbed at her face with her sleeve. "I'm tired of grown-ups being wrong," she whispered. Jake stood slowly, feeling the weight of both their hearts in his chest. He looked at Nora. Her shoulders were hunched, her good hand clutching the strap of her bag. The wind tugged at her hair, bearing more of the scars that cut along her jaw and down her neck. She held herself like someone who had learned to make her body smaller when people stared. "I can stay away," she said again, barely audible, "if that's what you need." For a moment, the night around them felt suspended. The cars on Main Street, the flicker of the streetlight, the distant bark of a dog, all of it seemed to hold its breath. Jake thought about his paycheck, about the principal's warning, about Bonnie's threats to talk to a lawyer if this keeps up, about how fragile their little 3-person constellation really was. He also thought about how when Emma laughed, now it sounded a little more like it used to. About how when Nora looked at him, she didn't see just a janitor. She saw someone whose presence mattered. He took in a slow breath, the cold air burning his lungs. "I don't know how this is going to play out," he said, voice low but steady. "But I know this. I'm not going to teach my kid that we back away from good people just because other folks are uncomfortable looking at them." Nora's eyes shone in the parking lot light. "Jake?" she began. He shook his head, cutting her off gently. "They're having that fall potluck at the church next week," he said. "Emma's been begging me to take her. They want to see if we're part of the community enough. Why don't you come?" The words hung there, wild and dangerous. Nora stared at him like he'd suggested they walk into a firing squad. "A church basement full of people who already think I'm a walking cautionary tale," she said slowly. "You sure about that?" He glanced at Emma, who had straightened hope written plainly across her face. "I'm sure about who I want sitting at our table," he replied. Nora's good hand trembled around her bag strap. For a long heartbeat, it seemed like she might say no. Then she nodded once. "Okay," she said. "I'll come." As they parted ways and Jake buckled Emma into the car, his phone buzzed. A text from Bonnie lit up the screen. "Heard you're bringing that woman around, Emma, again. If you won't protect my granddaughter, I will. We'll talk." He stared at the words. The threat humming underneath them felt the pressure of a town's judgment pressing in on all sides. He slipped the phone back into his pocket without replying, started the car, and pulled out onto the road. Next Thursday, there would be a church basement and folding tables and a town full of watchers. The pot was boiling. One more twist of the flame, and something was going to spill over. The church basement smelled like crock pots and floor polish, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes long after you left. People crowded around the long folding tables arranging casseroles and gossip in equal measure. The chatter was bright, brittle, full of that small-town energy where everyone pretends they aren't watching everyone else. Jake and Emma stepped through the double doors first. Nora followed a few paces behind. She wore a soft blue sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back on one side, the other falling forward the way she liked. The pinned sleeve of her left arm brushed her hip when she walked. She held herself the way someone does when they've trained their whole life to be small, to make their presence take up as little air as possible. A ripple moved across the room when she entered. Heads turned, plates froze. One woman stopped stacking cupcakes mid-reach. Jake felt Emma tighten her grip on his hand. Her wide brown eyes flicked from parent to parent, from stiff shoulders to sharp whispers. "Daddy," she whispered. "They're staring again." He squeezed her hand gently. "They're only staring because they don't know better," he said softly. "That's not our fault." But even as he said it, he felt the tension growing like pressure behind a dam. The warnings, the complaints, the principal's veiled threat, Bonnie's text, Nora's trembling voice when she said she'd stay away if he needed her to. Everything was teetering, balanced on the razor edge of this moment. He spotted an empty table near the back and guided Emma toward it. Nora walked with them, chin slightly tucked, gaze on the floor. When she pulled out a chair, two people at the neighboring table actually got up and moved. Jake felt something hot crawl through his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "You doing okay?" he asked quietly. Nora nodded once, though her good hand trembled when she unfolded her napkin. He sat across from her, Emma between them, and tried to pretend the room wasn't bristling. The pastor made a few announcements. Kids ran around. Crock-pot lids clattered. The noise grew again, masking the whispers, until the basement door banged open behind them. Every head turned. Bonnie Reynolds marched inside like a storm. She wore her Sunday best pearls tight around her throat, mouth pressed into a line so hard it looked carved. Her husband, Jim, trailed behind, uncomfortable but loyal. Jake's stomach dropped. He knew that look. He knew that stride. He stood quickly, pushing his chair back. "Bonnie," he said, stepping forward, "don't do this here." She brushed past him like a gust of cold air. Her eyes landed on Nora, really landed on her, and something like disgust flashed across her face before she smoothed it over with righteous concern. "So, this is her," Bonnie said loudly enough for people 3 tables away to hear. "This is the woman you think should be around my granddaughter." Conversations died. The clatter of spoons stilled. Emma stood frozen beside the table. Tiny shoulders curled inward. Nora didn't speak. She only lowered her eyes, the familiar shield sliding into place. Jake stepped between them. "That's enough," he said. "You've said plenty already." Bonnie ignored him completely. She took a step toward Nora. "I don't know what your story is," she said sharply, "but you and my granddaughter have no." Emma's voice burst out like a spark catching dry tinder. "Stop it." Her whole body shook. She looked furious and terrified all at once. "Miss Nora is nice," she said, voice cracking. "She helps me read. She listens when I talk about Mom. She's my friend." A hush fell so complete that even the toddlers upstairs seemed to stop making noise. Bonnie's expression softened for half a second, then pinched again, as if Emma's outburst had proved her point. "Honey," she said, her tone woven with condescension, "people like her can confuse children. And your father," she turned sharply toward Jake, "should know better than to expose you to someone who can't even take care of herself." It happened before Jake could react. Nora stood up. Slowly, deliberately, and that single movement seemed to tilt the room. She wasn't trembling now. Her shoulders were straight, her chin lifted. The hair that usually fell forward to shield her scars had slipped back, exposing the full map of healed burns running along her jaw and neck. People stared, but not the way they had before. Something raw and electric moved through the space. Jake saw it the moment Nora decided she wasn't going to shrink. Not tonight. Not in front of Emma. Not in front of anyone. She opened her mouth to speak, but didn't get the chance. Because at that exact moment, someone on the other side of the room yelled, "Pastor Tom! Pastor! Something's wrong." Jake's head snapped toward the sound. An older man, Earl Jennings, was slumped in his folding chair, eyes glassy, one hand clutching his chest. His wife was shaking his shoulder, panic flooding her face. "He can't breathe," she cried. "Somebody call 911. Chaos erupted. Chairs scraped. People shouted. A couple of teenagers backed away, startled. Someone dropped a plate of pasta that exploded across the floor. Bonnie gasped and rushed toward Earl, but froze halfway, pressing a trembling hand to her mouth. Jake didn't freeze. He reacted before he could think. He knew Earl. The man always made a point to slip Emma an extra cookie after service. Jake had fixed his mower once. He didn't owe the man anything, but that wasn't the point. He sprinted across the room and knelt beside him. "Earl," he said, voice firm, "can you hear me?" Earl's only response was a faint, gurgling breath. Jake looked at the wife. "Has he had heart problems before?" She nodded frantically, tears spilling. "He had stents put in last year." "God, Jake, help him." Jake had no formal medical training, but years of being the first adult on scene at 100 middle school injuries, sprains, fainting spells, allergic reactions had taught him one thing. Panic kills faster than most emergencies. He turned to the nearest group. "Call 911, he said. "Now. Tell them it's a cardiac event." Someone fumbled out their phone. Earl slumped sideways, his lips tinged blue. Jake lowered the man to the floor carefully and checked his pulse. Nothing. A cold rush swept through his limbs. "Emma," he called over his shoulder. "Come here." She hurried over, scared, but obedient. "Sweetheart, I need you to go stand with Miss Nora, right now." Her eyes widened. She understood what that meant. She ran toward Nora without hesitation. And Jake began chest compressions, his palms pressed down in a steady rhythm, counting silently, steady, relentless. He didn't worry about the dozens of eyes fixed on him. He didn't hear Bonnie's sharp gasp or the pastor's trembling prayers. He only heard his own heartbeat thudding in time with each push. He thought of Carrie, how he'd been helpless when her heart stopped in their bed, how he'd begged the paramedics to keep trying. Not again. Not tonight. Not on this church basement floor. Not to a man who still had family sitting 3 feet away. "Come on, Earl," he murmured between compressions. "Stay with me." At some point, someone brought the AED from the lobby. Jake tore open the case, hands steady even as sweat ran down his temples. He placed the pads following the verbal prompts. "Stand clear," he said. The shock jolted Earl's body upward. A collective gasp filled the air. Jake resumed compressions immediately. Then a cough, a stuttering, painful cough. Earl sucked in a ragged breath. His wife burst into sobs. Jake leaned back on his heels, exhausted chest heaving. It took a full heartbeat before he realized the room had gone utterly still. The EMTs arrived seconds later, rushing through the basement doors and taking over with swift efficiency. The pastor shook Jake's shoulder eyes wide with disbelief. You saved him," he said, voice trembling. "Jake, you just saved his life." Jake opened his mouth to answer, but before he could, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned. It was Nora. Emma stood at her side, clutching her remaining hand. And behind them, every watching face in the room. Their expressions weren't disgust. They weren't pity. They were something closer to awe. Nora stepped forward, her eyes shining, and spoke in a voice that carried across the basement. "You need to see something," she said, not to Jake, but to everyone. And then she looked directly at Bonnie. "At this table tonight," she continued, "you judged me for how I look, for what I've survived. You judged Jake for standing with me, but the man you just tried to shame is the reason someone's husband is still alive." Bonnie's face drained of color. Nora's voice didn't shake. "I came here afraid," she said. "Afraid of your stares, afraid of your whispers." But she nodded at Jake. "He came here knowing you might try to take his daughter away if he kept choosing kindness." A murmur rippled through the room. Realization? Shame. Something shifting. Nora looked at Jake, then really looked, and Jake saw it the moment she understood the weight he'd carried alone. The EMTs wheeled Earl toward the door, alive, breathing. His wife stopped beside Jake. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching his arm. "God bless you. Thank you." When she turned away, Jake finally looked down at his hands, shaking, still marked with the dust from the basement floor. He didn't feel heroic. He felt human, exhausted, raw, alive. Nora stepped closer. Emma reached for him with both arms. And every person in the room watched, stunned into silence, as Nora gently took Jake's unsteady hand in her own, mirroring the very gesture he had once used to guide her through a room full of judgment. The power dynamic had shifted. The room that had looked down on them was now looking up. When the EMTs pushed Earl through the double doors and the stretcher wheels rattled up the ramp, the basement finally exhaled. Conversation sputtered back to life in uneven bursts like a generator trying to turn over. People kept glancing at Jake, at Nora, at Emma, as if seeing all three of them under new light, they weren't sure how to process. Jake stood where he'd knelt moments earlier, hands still trembling, chest still rising too fast. The adrenaline that had carried him through compressions and the shock cycle was draining now, leaving him shaky, hollow, dizzy. He pressed one palm to a table for balance. Emma clung to his side. Her small fingers curled into the rough fabric of his work shirt. She kept looking up at him, eyes wide, not with fear anymore, but with something like awe. "You saved him," she whispered. "Daddy, you really saved him." He reached down, brushing his thumb over the crown of her head. "I just did what I could, bug." Nora stepped closer, her expression soft but fiercely steady in a way he hadn't expected. She wasn't shrinking now. She wasn't hiding behind her hair or her pinned sleeve. She stood upright, shoulders back, burn-scarred jawline visible under the bright fluorescent lights. "Jake," she murmured, her voice thick. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen." He opened his mouth to answer, but the pastor cut in first. "Everyone," Pastor Tom said, voice booming through the room, "please give Jake Nolan a moment. He may have just saved a life tonight." All eyes turned. and for once nobody tried to look away, except Bonnie. She stood near the dessert table, hands clutched around her purse. Strap, face, blotched red eyes darting between Jake and the doorway where Earl had disappeared. It was the expression of someone seeing her own reflection for the first time and not liking what stared back. She pressed her lips tight and looked down. Jake. Pastor Tom approached, placing a hand on his arm. "I didn't know you had training for something like that." Jake swallowed. "I don't. Not formally." He rubbed at his wrist, embarrassed by the attention. "I mean, I've taken the school's CPR courses when they make the staff do them. And, well, you pick up things when you're the first adult on scene for a lot of student accidents. You get used to responding instead of freezing." Pastor Tom nodded thoughtfully. "Still, most folks wouldn't have acted that fast, or that confidently." Jake felt his face warm. "I only did what anybody would have done." But even as he said it, he knew that wasn't true. He'd seen too many people freeze tonight. Pastor Tom turned toward the room. "Folks' dinner can wait a minute. I think we owe this man." "No," Jake interrupted gently. "No speeches. Please. I'm okay." The pastor respected that. He stepped back. But the room didn't stop watching. It felt like the entire foundation of this small-town social order had shifted 2 inches to the left, and nobody was sure how to stand anymore. Jake exhaled slowly. Then he felt more than heard someone approach from behind. "Jake." The voice was small, strained. "Bonnie." He turned. She looked smaller than usual, like the certainty she always wore like a suit of armor had cracked straight down the middle. Her eyes glistened, and not from anger. "I owe you." She swallowed hard, trying to force out words she clearly wasn't used to saying. "I owe you an apology." Jake blinked. He hadn't expected that, not ever. She looked at Emma, then at Nora, then quickly away from Nora's scars as if ashamed of herself. "I was wrong," Bonnie whispered. "About her, about you, about everything." Her voice trembled. "I spent the last 3 years telling myself you weren't capable of raising Emma alone," she went on. "That you weren't strong enough or steady enough. Tonight I watched you save a man's life with your bare hands. And she took a shaking breath. "I realized you've been strong all along. I just refused to see it." Jake said nothing. He didn't know what to say. "I thought Bonnie continued that protecting Emma meant controlling who she spent time with. That people who look different couldn't be good for her." She flinched at her own words as if hearing them out loud revealed their ugliness. Nora lowered her gaze, not out of shame, more like she was giving Bonnie the dignity of finishing. "I looked at you," Bonnie said to Nora, "and I judged you without knowing a thing about you. I'm so sorry, truly." Nora didn't speak. Her good hand tightened slightly around her bag strap, but she looked up and nodded once. There was no bitterness in her face, only a quiet, steady compassion that made Bonnie's chin tremble harder. "I was cruel," Bonnie whispered. "And you were kind to my granddaughter when she needed someone. I won't forget that." The room watched the exchange, stunned. Jake cleared his throat. "Bonnie, thank you. That means a lot." She squeezed Emma's shoulder, then stepped back, swallowed one last shaky breath, and returned to her husband, who placed an arm around her, pride in his eyes. The entire basement seemed to shift with them, as if the first domino had fallen. Mrs. Watkins approached next, wringing her hands. "Mr. Nolan," she said softly, "I may have misjudged some things as well." Jake blinked again. 2 apologies in one night. He wasn't sure he'd ever seen one apology from her. I didn't understand how much Emma grew this year, she continued. I didn't give credit where it was due, to either of you. She glanced toward Nora in a way that wasn't fearful or condescending this time, but respectful. Jake nodded politely, still unsure how to respond. And then the principal walked up. Mr. Daniels. Of all people, he looked the most shaken of anyone, a man realizing he'd nearly thrown away his own integrity to please the loudest voices. Nolan, he said quietly. The staff talked. It seems you were the only one tonight who kept your head. He swallowed hard. I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry if any concerns were pushed too hard earlier. We were wrong. Jake felt something inside his chest loosen, something that had been clenched tight for years. It wasn't vindication, it was relief. People moved toward the tables again, more slowly this time, eyes softer, voices quieter. Not because the event had ended, but because something inside the room had been rewired. Unexpectedly, Nora's hand found Jake's. Her fingers threaded gently through his. He turned toward her. You okay? He asked softly. She smiled a tiny crooked smile that pulled slower on the right side, but it reached her eyes in a way he hadn't seen before. No, she whispered. But I feel seen, and that's new. Emma threw her arms around both of them, squeezing hard. Jake laughed under his breath. And that was the moment Pastor Tom cleared his throat again. Everyone the pastor called before we returned to dinner. May I have your attention one last time? Jake tensed slightly. Nora squeezed his hand. Pastor Tom stepped forward, his expression more solemn now. Some of you have been coming to this church longer than Jake, he said. Some of you barely know him at all. But tonight, we witnessed something extraordinary. Not just a heroic act, but a truth about the man we've overlooked. He turned toward Jake. Many of you don't know this, the pastor said, but Jake grew up in this congregation. He was the kid who showed up early to shovel the steps after snowstorms, the teenager who volunteered at the summer camp even when he worked nights, the young husband who never missed service unless he was scheduled at the school. And after Carrie passed, his voice softened. He still showed up, quietly, faithfully, never asking for anything, never telling any of us how hard it was. The room hushed further. Jake felt his ears burn. Pastor Tom held up a hand. Let me finish. He faced the congregation. Jake Nolan has been living a life of service in ways many of us never saw, and I'll tell you all something else. He nodded toward Nora. He's not the only one. A murmur spread. Nora, the pastor, continued gently. I've learned something tonight, too. That woman standing beside him has more grace in her pinky finger than most of us carry in our whole bodies. Nora's cheeks flushed with color. Pastor Tom took a breath. And that leads me to a proposal. Jake stiffened. A proposal? The pastor looked around the room, then spoke louder with conviction. Our community outreach center has been understaffed for years. We've needed someone capable, steady, skilled under pressure. Someone who can teach first aid, mentor kids, coordinate volunteers, meet people where they are. He looked Jake dead in the eye. Jake, he said, I want you to consider taking the new coordinator role. Jake's mouth fell open. I'm a custodian, he stammered. I mop floors. I fix leaks. You saved a man tonight, the pastor said simply. And you've been quietly saving kids for a decade. I don't care what's printed on your paycheck. I care what's printed on your character. Jake swallowed hard. His heart thudded in his ears. And Nora Pastor Tom added, turning to her if you're willing, we'd like you to help lead the accessibility and disability outreach program. You've already changed one child's life. I think you could change many more. The breath caught in Nora's throat. Jake saw it the way she blinked fast, fighting tears. The way her shoulders shook with something like disbelief. People weren't looking at her scars now. They were looking at her strength. Pastor Tom stepped back. No pressure. Think about it. Pray on it. But know this tonight showed all of us who you really are. Jake felt the world shift under his feet. New choices. New possibilities. New risks. Nora squeezed his hand again. Her voice was barely a whisper. Jake, what do we do now? He looked around the room at the faces that had doubted him, judged him, feared. Nora underestimated all of them and saw something he'd never seen before. Respect, possibility, hope. We decide, he whispered back, what kind of future we want. And with that, the night settled into a quiet hum of new beginnings. Something big was coming. He could feel it. When the casseroles were finally uncovered again, and the potluck crept back to life, it didn't look anything like the room they'd walked into an hour earlier. People approached Jake with quiet handshakes, with pats on the back, with the kind of soft, humbled eyes that belonged to folks who'd just realized they'd misjudged a man who'd never asked for anything. Bonnie stayed close to her husband, watching Jake, with the solemn expression of someone reckoning with her own behavior. When she caught Emma's eye, she offered the girl a tentative smile, gentler this time, almost shy. Nora stood at Jake's side through it all, the fluorescent lights casting a warm glow across her scarred cheek. For the first time since he'd met her, he didn't see her tuck her face down or angle her hair to hide anything. She held her head up. She let people look. Some looked with awe, some with apology, and a few with something like shame for how they'd treated her before. When the pastor's offer sank in, Jake felt the weight of it hit him like a tide hesitation. Hope, fear, possibility, all rolling together. The outreach center. A real role. A way to do something that mattered beyond mops and wrenches. People he trusted putting faith in him for the first time in years. You think I could actually do that job? He asked softly, once the crowd dispersed. Nora looked at him the way she had back in the parking lot the night this all began, with no judgment, only truth. I think you've been doing pieces of it your whole life, she said. This just lets other people finally see it. Emma beamed like she'd been waiting her whole 8 years to hear someone say exactly that. She wrapped both her arms around Jake's waist and didn't let go for a solid minute. In the days that followed, the shift was unmistakable. Parents who once whispered in hallways now greeted him warmly. Teachers who'd overlooked him started including him in conversations, instead of calling him only when something spilled. The principal sat him down, not to caution him, but to tell him the school wanted to support whatever decision he made about the new role. Bonnie called 2 days later, voice softer than he'd ever heard it. She didn't make excuses. She just apologized again, this time without an audience, and asked if they could come over for dinner sometime, just to talk. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. By Thanksgiving, Jake had accepted the new job at the outreach center, a part-time position that would grow into full-time once the funding was finalized. For the first time in years, he was able to drop one of his night shifts. It meant evenings at home with Emma. It meant not collapsing into bed half asleep with his shoes still on. It meant breathing room, and Nora found a place under the same roof. The church hired her as a consultant, at first teaching classes on adaptive tools and communication, helping set up disability-accessible programming, working with kids who struggled with sensory or motor issues. Turned out, she had a gift for it. Children responded to her in ways adults never had: curious, open, accepting. The very traits she was slowly relearning to give herself. What surprised Jake most was how naturally she slid into their life. She came over to help Emma practice her signing. She stayed for dinner more often than not. She and Jake talked on the porch after Emma went to bed, watching the streetlights hum to life, sharing pieces of their pasts slowly, like unwinding old knots. She never rushed anything. Neither did he. 6 months later, Earl stopped by the outreach center, walking on his own 2 feet, to shake Jake's hand and lay eyes on the man who'd given him a second chance. He hugged Nora too, thanking her for standing with his wife while the EMTs worked. He told them both that the night they saved him helped him fix things with his own children. "Funny how one moment can ripple," he said before he left. The town changed in small, steady ways after that. People were kinder to the unfamiliar, more patient with the awkward, less eager to judge a person by what they'd lost or where they worked. Nobody said it outright, but everyone felt it the night in that church basement had pulled a thread loose in the town's fabric, and somehow the whole thing held together a little better afterward. A year to the day after the potluck, the Outreach Center held its first big community event in the gymnasium of the school Jake used to clean at night. Handmade banners hung from the rafters. Kids ran between tables with painted faces. Earl manned the grill, telling anyone who'd listen how Jake brought him back from the edge of the great beyond. Jake stood by the first aid table in a new shirt Nora had picked out for him, a soft blue button-down that didn't feel like a uniform, just him. Emma darted around with a clipboard assistant coordinator written in marker on the top. Nora ran a station teaching kids how to sign their own names, smiling as a boy dragged his mother over so she could show Nora her progress. Jake watched them, his daughter, this remarkable woman, the whole noisy room, and felt a peace he hadn't known in years, a peace that wasn't born of ease, but of purpose, of belonging. Nora walked over, eventually, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, the late afternoon sunlight catching the uneven lines on her cheek in a way that made them glow rather than disappear. "Pretty good turnout," she said, nudging his shoulder. "Think you did all right?" He huffed a laugh. "Think we did all right." "Fair enough." Emma ran up and grabbed both their hands. "Daddy, Miss Nora, come outside. The sunset looks like the sky's on fire." They stepped out to the schoolyard together, the horizon blazing in oranges and pinks. Emma spun in the fading light, arms thrown wide. Jake looked over at Nora. She was watching the sunset with the softest expression he'd ever seen on her, the look of someone who finally understood she wasn't on the outside of life anymore. He laced his fingers with hers. She didn't flinch. She held on. And as the three of them stood there in the warm Ohio dusk, Jake felt something settle into place. Not a finish line, not a grand victory, just a life. A good one, a real one. Sometimes the world measures a person by the shine of their resume or the smoothness of their surface. But sometimes, every once in a while, it gets a front row seat to the truth that the strongest people aren't the ones who never break. They're the ones who never stop showing up. And when they take your hand, you learn pretty quick that courage doesn't always look like a roar. Sometimes it looks like a quiet man with tired eyes, a scarred woman learning to stand tall again, and a little girl tugging them both toward the light.